Welcome to Twisted Nightmares. Tonight we journey through realms of endless shadows. Close your eyes, relax, and let the sound of the rain carry you into a world where the storm never ends, and the whispers are more than just the wind. If you enjoy these tales, don't forget to subscribe and hit the bell icon for more chilling stories. Now, let's begin. The Whispering Rain. It began with a storm. Not just any storm, but one that seemed to stretch on for days, weeks, perhaps even years. The rain fell in endless sheets, drowning the world in a cold, gray haze. The trees swayed heavily under the weight of the water, their branches creaking like old bones. The sky was a canvas of dark, rolling clouds, and the air was thick with the scent of wet earth and decay. And in the heart of this storm stood a house, an old, crumbling structure nestled deep within the woods. Its roof sagged under the relentless rain, and its windows were dark, like empty eyes staring out into the void. The house had been abandoned for years, or so the locals claimed. But to Evelyn, it was a sanctuary. She had left the city behind, seeking solitude, peace, and perhaps a fresh start. The house had been cheap, too cheap, but she hadn't questioned it. Not then. As she stepped inside, the air was heavy with the scent of damp wood and decay. The floorboards creaked beneath her feet, each step echoing through the empty halls. The walls were lined with peeling wallpaper, and the furniture was covered in dusty sheets, like ghosts frozen in time. She wandered through the rooms, her footsteps slow and deliberate. The kitchen was a relic of the past, with an old iron stove and a sink stained with rust. The living room was dominated by a large, stone fireplace, its hearth cold and empty. And then there was the attic, a place she had yet to explore. That first night, Evelyn tried to settle in. She lit a fire in the hearth, though the wood was damp and reluctant to burn. The flames sputtered and hissed, casting long, dancing shadows on the walls. And as she sat there, wrapped in a blanket, she heard it for the first time. A whisper. It was faint, almost imperceptible, like the rustle of leaves in the wind. But it was there. And it was calling her name. Evelyn. She froze, her breath catching in her throat. The voice was soft, almost soothing, but it sent a chill down her spine. She told herself it was just the wind, the rain playing tricks on her ears. But deep down, she knew it was something more. Days turned into nights, and the whispers grew louder. They came at odd hours, when she was cooking, when she was reading, even when she was trying to sleep. Always her name. Evelyn. Evelyn. At first, she tried to ignore them. But the more she tried, the more insistent they became. They were no longer just whispers, they were voices, multiple voices, overlapping, pleading, demanding. One night, unable to sleep, she decided to confront them. She followed the sound to the attic, a place she had avoided since moving in. The stairs groaned under her weight, and the air grew colder with each step. And there, in the dim light of her flickering lantern, she saw it. A box. Old, weathered, and covered in dust. The whispers seemed to emanate from within. With trembling hands, she opened it. Inside were photographs, letters, and a diary. The photographs showed a family, a man, a woman, and a little girl. They were smiling, but their eyes were hollow, filled with a sadness that made Evelyn's heart ache. The diary belonged to the woman. Her name was Margaret, and she had lived in this house decades ago. As Evelyn read, she learned the truth. The family had been plagued by the same whispers, the same voices. They had tried to leave, but the storm had trapped them. And one by one, they had disappeared. The Mirrored Room. The house stood at the end of Blackwood Lane, its windows dark against the gray sky. Sarah held the key in her trembling hand, still unable to believe her grandmother had left her this place. The lawyer said it had been empty for decades, though the garden looked freshly tended. The path to the front door was lined with overgrown roses, their thorns catching at her coat like desperate fingers. The stones beneath her feet were worn smooth, as if countless others had walked this same path before her. But that was impossible. No one had lived here since her grandmother disappeared 20 years ago. The key turned with surprising ease, as if the house had been waiting for her. Inside, the air was thick with the scent of lavender and dust. Sheets covered the furniture like sleeping ghosts, and the wooden floors whispered beneath her feet. But it was the mirrors that caught her attention. They were everywhere, hanging on walls, standing in corners, their frames ornate and ancient. Each one seemed to reflect a slightly different version of the room, as if reality itself was splitting apart. In one mirror, the sheets were blue instead of white. In another, the furniture was arranged differently. And in the tallest mirror, standing at the end of the hall, Sarah could have sworn she saw someone walking past, though she was completely alone. That first night, she tried to sleep in the master bedroom. The mirrors there were covered, but she could feel them watching. In the darkness, she heard it, the sound of glass slowly cracking. By morning, all the mirrors were uncovered. Sarah was certain she had left them draped, but now each one stood bare, their surfaces gleaming in the gray light that filtered through the dusty windows. As she walked past them, she noticed something strange. Her reflection moved just a fraction of a second too late, like an echo of her movements. In the kitchen, she found her grandmother's journals, stacked neatly on a shelf that had been empty the night before. The pages were filled with frantically scribbled notes about the mirrors. According to her grandmother, each mirror showed a different version of reality, a path not taken. The more you looked into them, the more they looked back into you. Days began to blur together. Sarah would catch glimpses of other versions of herself in the mirrors, one with longer hair, another wearing clothes she didn't own, yet another that seemed older, sadder. They watched her, these other Sarahs, their eyes following her movements across the room. She tried to leave once. Packed her bags and walked to the front door. But when she opened it, she found only another mirror, showing her reflection walking away while she remained behind. Every window, every door, all of them had become mirrors. The whispers started on the seventh night. They came from the mirrors, countless versions of her own voice calling out. They told her stories of other lives, other choices, other fates. Each reflection offered her a different path, a different story. In one mirror, she saw herself happy and successful. In another, she glimpsed a life filled with adventure. But in the tallest mirror, the one at the end of the hall, she saw the truth, her grandmother, trapped behind the glass, surrounded by countless other trapped souls who had chosen the wrong reflection. The Endless Library. The old Carnegie Library stood on the corner of Maple and Fifth, its stone walls blackened with age. Rebecca had worked there for 3 years, but she had never been asked to cover the night shift until now. The regular night librarian had vanished 2 weeks ago, leaving nothing but a half-empty cup of coffee at the reference desk. The library changed after sunset. The towering shelves cast longer shadows, and the sound of pages turning could be heard from the empty reading rooms. Rebecca told herself it was just the old building settling, the papers shifting in the climate-controlled air. She sat at the reference desk, sorting through returns, when she noticed something odd about the books. Each one she opened contained different text than it should have. Classic novels had transformed into personal diaries, their pages filled with increasingly desperate entries. One book, which should have been Pride and Prejudice, now contained the story of Thomas Blackwood, who had come to the library one night in 1954 to research his family history. The final entry described him walking into the stacks, following the sound of whispered voices, never to be seen again. The deeper Rebecca looked into the collection, the more altered books she found. Each one told the story of someone who had disappeared within these walls. A teenage girl in 1967 who stayed late to study. A retired professor in 1982 who came to read ancient texts. A young mother in 1995 who was researching local history. The books seemed to be organizing themselves. When she returned to check the shelves where she had found the altered volumes, they were gone, moved to different sections. She began to notice that the library catalog was changing too, listing titles she had never seen before: The Last Reader, Midnight Collection, Stories of the Lost. At midnight, the lights in the reference section began to flicker. Rebecca heard the distinct sound of typing coming from the computer lab, though all the machines were turned off. In the card catalog, thousands of cards began to shuffle themselves, their whispered movements filling the air like paper wings. She found herself drawn to the oldest part of the library, the rare book room in the basement. The temperature dropped with each step down the narrow stairs. The smell of aged paper and leather grew stronger, mixed with something else: ink, fresh ink. In the rare book room, she found a manuscript writing itself. Words appeared on blank pages as if drawn by an invisible hand. To her horror, she realized it was telling her story. Her arrival at the library, her discoveries throughout the night, and what was about to happen next. The books had been collecting stories, she realized. Not just recording them, but gathering them. Each disappeared person had become part of the library's collection, their experiences bound in leather and paper, shelved and catalogued for eternity. The manuscript continued writing, describing how she tried to run, how the shelves moved to block her path, how the books opened around her, their pages fluttering like hungry mouths. The last page remained unfinished, waiting for her story's end. The night train. The platform at Ravens Cross Station was empty, as it always was at 3 a.m. Marcus checked his watch again, though he knew the time. He wasn't supposed to be here. No trains ran this late. But the ticket had appeared in his mailbox, golden letters promising a journey on the midnight line. The rails began to hum, a deep vibration that shook the ground. In the distance, a light appeared, though it seemed to illuminate nothing around it. The train that pulled into the station was unlike any Marcus had ever seen. Its black metal surface seemed to absorb the station lights, and its windows showed only darkness. The doors opened with a sound like a sigh. Inside, the car was lined with plush velvet seats, all empty except for a single figure at the far end. As Marcus stepped aboard, he realized the figure was transparent, visible only when seen from the corner of his eye. The train began to move, but the station outside the windows disappeared too quickly, replaced by a landscape of shadows and mist. Each stop brought stranger passengers, a woman in clothes from the 1940s, a man who cast no reflection in the windows, a child who spoke in voices that echoed from different times. Marcus learned the truth from a conductor who walked the aisles collecting tickets that changed color with each glance. This was the train that ran between stations that no longer existed, carrying passengers who had missed their proper stops in life. Some were running from their past, others searching for lost futures. At each stop, more passengers boarded, but none ever left. The train grew longer with each station, adding cars that contained different years, different possibilities. In one car, it was always 1963. In another, the year 2045 played out endlessly. Marcus realized his ticket had no destination printed on it. When he asked the conductor, the ghostly figure smiled with too many teeth. The destination, he said, is different for everyone. But no one ever really gets off the night train. They just move to different cars. Through the windows, Marcus watched cities that had never existed roll past. He saw stations built in dimensions that hurt his eyes to look at. And in every reflection, in every window, he saw himself growing transparent, becoming just another passenger on the endless line. The Echo House. The real estate agent had warned Jennifer about the house's history. 6 families had moved out in the past year alone, each leaving suddenly, taking nothing with them. But the price was too good to pass up, and Jennifer had never believed in ghost stories. The first echo came on her 3rd night. She was in the kitchen when she heard herself humming, except she wasn't humming. The sound came from the living room, accompanied by the clink of cups she would wash the next morning. Soon, she began hearing fragments of conversations she hadn't had yet, footsteps from walks she would take later that day. The house was filled with echoes of future moments, playing out like previews of a life not yet lived. She started keeping a journal of the echoes, trying to match them to events as they actually happened. Most played out exactly as she had heard them, but some echoes seemed to come from futures that never materialized, arguments with visitors who never came, phone calls that never rang. The echoes grew longer, more complex. She would hear entire days play out in advance, her voice discussing things she hadn't yet experienced, laughing at jokes she hadn't heard, crying over pain she hadn't felt. The house was like a radio, tuned to stations broadcasting different versions of her future. In the basement, she found walls covered in notes left by previous residents. They had all heard the echoes too. Each had tried to change the futures they heard, to avoid the fates that echoed through the house's halls. Their notes became increasingly desperate as they realized that trying to prevent an echo only ensured it would happen. One night, Jennifer heard an echo of herself screaming. In the echo, she was reading the final notes left by the previous residents, realizing too late that the house didn't just predict the future, it created it. The echoes were like grooves in a record, tracks that life was forced to follow. She tried to leave, but every exit led her back inside. The house had already heard the echo of her staying, and now reality had to match the preview. Her own voice followed her from room to room, narrating her growing understanding in despair. The final echo was the quietest. In it, she heard herself joining the chorus of voices that filled the house, becoming just another echo for the next resident to hear. And as she listened to this future self, she felt her own voice fading, becoming just another sound in the house's endless symphony. The Memory Gardens. Beyond the iron gates of Willow Park, past the abandoned greenhouse, there was a garden that bloomed only at night. Elena discovered it while walking her dog, following the scent of flowers that should not have been blooming in winter. The garden looked different to everyone who entered it. To Elena, it appeared as a maze of rose bushes, their petals black in the moonlight. But the roses were not filled with flowers, they bloomed with memories. Each blossom contained a moment from someone's past, glowing like tiny films projected onto the petals. She recognized some of the memories as her own, her 5th birthday party, her first kiss, the last conversation with her father before he died. But there were other memories too, belonging to strangers whose paths had crossed this garden. Each flower held a different story, a different moment frozen in time. The deeper Elena walked into the garden, the more recent the memories became. She saw herself from just last week, making coffee in her kitchen. Then from yesterday, checking her mail. Finally, she found roses blooming with memories of things she hadn't done yet. Other visitors wandered the garden paths too, transparent figures reaching for their own memory flowers. Some tried to pluck the blossoms, hoping to take their memories home. But the moment a flower was picked, the memory it contained became real again, forcing its owner to relive it in full detail. Elena watched an old man pick a rose and collapse in tears as he relived his wedding day. A young woman reached for a blossom and laughed with joy as she experienced her college graduation again. But not all memories were happy ones. Some flowers were thornier than others, protecting darker moments that their owners had tried to forget. The gardener appeared at midnight, a figure made of shadow and starlight. He tended the memory flowers with careful precision, pruning away the fading ones, cultivating new blooms. He explained to Elena that memories had to be planted like seeds, nurtured and grown. The garden was a living archive of every moment experienced by those who walked its paths. But the garden was hungry for new memories. Each visitor had to plant a piece of their own past before leaving. The more precious the memory, the more beautiful the flowers it would grow. Those who refused to plant a memory found themselves unable to leave, wandering the paths until they became like the other transparent figures, forever searching for their lost moments. Elena knew she should leave, but the flowers kept drawing her deeper into the maze. She found a section of the garden where the roses bloomed with memories she had tried to forget, mistakes she had made, opportunities she had missed, words she wished she had never said. The gardener offered her a choice: she could reclaim one lost memory, but only by planting another in its place. The garden had to maintain its balance. Each recovered memory meant another had to be surrendered, forgotten forever once it took root in the soil. In the end, Elena became a regular visitor to the memory garden. Each night, she would trade one memory for another, slowly replacing her past with carefully chosen moments. But with each exchange, she felt herself becoming more like the transparent figures, less certain of which memories were truly her own. The Time Gallery. The art gallery appeared on the corner of 7th and Pine on the first day of every month, though no one seemed to remember it being built. Its windows were always dark, but light spilled from beneath the door, along with the faint sound of classical music. David entered the gallery on a rainy evening, seeking shelter from the storm. Inside, the walls were lined with paintings unlike any he had ever seen. Each canvas showed the same street corner, the same buildings, but in different times. One painting depicted the corner in 1920, another in 1850, and yet another showed what appeared to be the future. As he moved through the gallery, David noticed that the paintings seemed to move. Not in broad, obvious ways, but in subtle shifts of light and shadow. People in the paintings went about their daily lives, cars drove past, seasons changed, all in slow motion that was only visible if you watched long enough. The gallery curator emerged from a back room, her gray hair swept up in an elegant style that could have belonged to any decade from the past century. She explained that the gallery was a collection of moments, each painting a window into a different time. But these were not just paintings of the past and future, they were portals. Regular visitors to the gallery had learned to step through the paintings, traveling to the times they depicted. Some went back to relive their favorite memories, others jumped forward to glimpse their futures. The curator kept a ledger of all these temporal tourists, noting when they left and when, if, they returned. But there were rules. You could only step into a painting that showed a time during your own lifetime, either past or future. And you could only stay for as long as it took the painting to complete one of its slow cycles, usually about an hour. Stay too long, and you would become part of the painting, just another figure moving through an endless loop of time. David found himself drawn to a painting of the street from 5 years ago, the day he had met his wife. He watched their first encounter play out in oils and acrylics, saw himself spill coffee on her coat, remembered their nervous laughter. The curator smiled knowingly and told him he could step through, relive that moment one more time. But as he moved through the gallery, he began to notice something disturbing about the paintings. In each one, there were figures that never moved, frozen in time while the world changed around them. These were the visitors who had stayed too long, who had become trapped between moments. The paintings of the future were the most dangerous. They showed possible timelines, branching paths that might or might not come true. Visitors who stepped into these paintings sometimes found themselves in futures that no longer existed when they tried to return. In the final room of the gallery, David found a masterpiece, a massive canvas that showed all times at once, layers of history and future bleeding into each other like wet paint. In it, he could see himself entering the gallery, viewing the paintings, reading these very thoughts. The curator appeared beside him again, offering him a choice. He could step into any painting in the gallery, travel to any moment within his lifetime. But she warned him that time was like wet paint, try to touch it, and you would leave fingerprints that could never be erased. The Man in the Fog. The town of Black Hollow was famous for its rolling fog. Every evening, without fail, a dense mist would rise from the river and swallow the streets whole. Charlotte had lived in Black Hollow all her life, but she never paid much attention to the fog, until the night she saw the man standing in it. It was late, past midnight. She was walking home from her shift at the diner, her breath curling in the cold air. The gas lamps lining the cobblestone streets flickered, barely cutting through the mist. That was when she saw him. A tall figure in an old-fashioned coat and hat, standing at the edge of the street, just barely visible through the fog. Charlotte hesitated. The man didn't move. She took a step forward. He took a step back, deeper into the fog. A chill ran down her spine. Something about his movements felt wrong. Not quite human. She turned onto her street, quickening her pace. But as she reached her doorstep, she glanced over her shoulder. He was closer. Too close. Charlotte fumbled with her keys, heart pounding. The door finally swung open, and she slammed it shut behind her. She didn't dare look through the peephole. The next morning, the fog had cleared. There was no sign of the man. But her footprints in the frost-covered grass were not the only ones leading to her door. They were leading away as well. And they were much, much larger than her own. The room at the end of the hall. No one had ever opened the door at the end of the hall. When Daniel moved into the old boarding house, the landlady was clear that door stays locked. No questions. He didn't think much of it at first. The house was old, and old houses had their secrets. But as the weeks passed, he couldn't shake the feeling that something was behind that door. Watching. Listening. Every night, just past 3, he would hear it. A soft creak. A whisper of movement. A shadow slipping through the crack under the door. One night, he couldn't take it anymore. He pressed his ear to the wood. Silence. Then. A voice. Let me out. Daniel stumbled back, heart pounding. He told himself he imagined it, but the next night, the whispers returned. Let me out. He swore he wouldn't do it. He would ignore it. Forget about it. But on the 7th night, the door was unlocked. And slightly open. The hallway stretched longer than it should have, the wallpaper peeling, the air thick with something foul. Daniel stepped inside. The door slammed shut. And the whisper became a laugh. Remember, in the world of endless shadows, every reflection holds a trap, every book tells a truth, every train leads to darkness, and every echo marks a fate. Sleep well, if you dare. Don't forget to subscribe and hit the bell icon for more chilling stories.